The desert had a way of lying to men. Under the cruel sun and endless dust, it pretended to be empty, lifeless, worthless. That illusion had broken. For Daniel Cross the day his seismic readings screamed the impossible. Oil, thick and rich, buried deep beneath Apache land that the world had forgotten. Daniel was not a greedy man by nature. He was a field geologist, a widower with dust in his boots and guilt in his chest, chasing contracts to outrun his memories. When the data confirmed what any oil company would kill for, his hands trembled, not with excitement but with dread. The land belonged to the White Mesa Apache, a people pushed to the edges of maps and conversations, a tribe whose treaties had been broken more times than Daniel could count. Company protocol was clear: report, secure, extract. But nothing in Daniel's education had prepared him for the old. Apache woman who appeared at his campfire that night, silent as the wind, her face carved with both age and authority. She did not threaten him. She did not beg. She only said, "This land remembers every promise broken upon it." Daniel slept poorly. The next morning he packed his equipment, erased the core samples from his drive, and filed a false report stating the land was dry. His supervisor laughed at the bad luck. The oil companies moved on. Daniel walked away from a fortune that would have made him rich beyond measure. And for 7 years he lived quietly, teaching geology at a community college, never speaking of the decision that haunted him. But the desert does not forget. The Apache did not forget. And fate was only patient, not finished. If this moment already grips your heart, subscribe now. Because what comes next will change everything you think you know about sacrifice, honor, and justice. 7 years after Daniel Cross buried the truth, the past came riding back into his life, not as a whisper but as thunder. It began with a knock at his door just before dawn. Outside stood 3 Apache men and a woman in ceremonial dress, their expressions unreadable, their presence heavy with purpose. Daniel's chest tightened. He thought they had come for revenge, or accusation, or silence enforced too late. Instead, the woman stepped forward and placed a folded document into his hands. It was a deed, land rights transferred legally, irrevocably in his name. The Apache had discovered the oil themselves, not through greed, but necessity. They had negotiated fair terms, built schools, clinics, clean water systems, and preserved their sovereignty. And yet, they had not forgotten the man who could have stolen everything and chose not to. "You walked away when no one would have known," the elder said. "That is why we returned." Daniel wept openly as they explained their decision. They had set aside a share of the land's profit for him, not as payment, but as recognition of honor. More shocking still, they asked him to help guide future negotiations, to be a bridge between worlds that had only known conflict. Daniel accepted not the wealth, but the responsibility. The story of the man who walked away spread far and wide, becoming legend among the Apache and a quiet rebellion against a world built on taking. In the final scene, Daniel stands once more on the desert soil, watching Apache children run freely across land that finally belonged to them, knowing that sometimes the greatest riches come not from what you claim, but from what you refuse to steal. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you that integrity still matters, subscribe to the channel now for more unforgettable stories where humanity triumphs over greed. Honor, Daniel Cross learned, is never free. It costs sleep. It costs safety. Sometimes it costs blood. When word spread that the White Mesa Apache had struck oil and kept control of it, the desert attracted more than opportunity. It drew predators. Corporations with polished smiles and lawyers sharper than knives arrived first, offering partnerships that sounded fair until the fine print revealed the same old theft in modern clothing. When that failed, pressure followed. Permits were delayed, inspections multiplied. Anonymous threats slipped under doors like snakes. Daniel stood between the tribe and the storm, not as a savior, but as a shield willing to be struck. He taught the elders how to read contracts line by line, how to weaponize transparency, how to turn the law once used to crush them into armor. Nights grew longer and fear crept in like cold. One evening, as Daniel drove home along a lonely stretch of road. Headlights appeared behind him, too close, too patient. The truck rammed his rear bumper once, a warning. Then again, Daniel's hands shook, but he didn't run. He pulled over, stepped out, and faced the men who emerged, hired muscle with dead eyes. "Tell your bosses," Daniel said, voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "This land is no longer unguarded." The men laughed and drove off, but the message spread. The Apache responded not with violence but unity. They formed councils, invited journalists, opened their books to the public, and turned secrecy into sunlight. When a federal investigation later exposed corporate coercion and corruption, the same companies that once circled like vultures retreated in disgrace. Years passed. The schools thrived. The clinics saved lives. The desert bloomed with purpose. On the 7th anniversary of the tribe's return, Daniel was invited to stand before the people. The elder who once warned him by the fire placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You did not save us. You stood when it was easier to walk away again." Daniel looked across the land, at children who would never know the hunger of displacement, and finally understood the true cost of his choice and its immeasurable reward. If this chapter stirred something deep inside you, subscribe now, because the greatest stories are not about power taken, but power shared. Defended and earned, time does. Not heal land the way it heals people. Land remembers. It keeps the weight of footsteps, the echo of prayers, the scars of greed. Years after the oil wells began to flow under Apache control, the desert itself seemed to change, as if it were finally breathing without fear. Daniel Cross noticed it first during an early morning walk across White Mesa, when the wind carried a softness it never had before. Where there had once been silence heavy with abandonment, there were now voices, children laughing, elders teaching, drums echoing at dusk. But peace is never permanent when money still whispers in the dark. A new threat emerged quietly, not with trucks or threats, but with papers stamped by distant offices. A federal claim surfaced, arguing that an ancient clerical error voided Apache ownership. It was the kind of lie that had erased nations before. Panic rippled through the community, but this time fear did not rule them. The tribe stood firm, united, and Daniel felt something shift inside him. This was no longer his fight to lead. It was his duty to follow their strength. He watched Apache lawyers once, children in underfunded schools stand before judges and speak with calm precision. He watched elders testify about boundaries older than any map. When the ruling finally came down, affirming Apache sovereignty beyond appeal, the courtroom fell silent. Outside, under an unforgiving sun, the tribe did not celebrate with shouting. They knelt and pressed their hands to the earth. Daniel did the same. In that moment, the land seemed to answer back, not with words, but with a stillness so complete it felt sacred. Daniel understood then that his story was no longer the center. He was a footnote in something far larger, a rare chapter where greed failed, where honor endured, where a people reclaimed what was always theirs. As night fell, a fire was lit, and the elder spoke one final time. "The land saw who you were when no one watched." Daniel felt tears burn his eyes, knowing some choices echo longer than lifetimes. If this story reminded you that integrity still shapes the world, subscribe to this channel, because these are the stories worth carrying forward.